Hello, my dear viewers, it's good to be with you. My name is Olga Demchuk, and I am a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today I want to talk with you about hatred, because there is so much of it now. Hatred is like a genie from a bottle. Once it escapes, it has no desire to go back. This video is called Inspired by Hatred. Hatred is a very powerful drug. And once a person tries it, they can't give it up. First of all, hatred gives an enormous amount of energy. Think back to your own life when someone said something about you that wasn't true. You feel a wave rising inside, and suddenly you have a clear sense of what needs to be done and against whom. You feel that you are good, an innocent victim of offense, and somewhere out there is an enemy who must be avenged. In that moment, it's as if we gather ourselves into a sphere, a dense ball filled with explosive energy, with a clear target. Today, I brought you a little cage with two kittens. You've already seen them. A white kitten and a black kitten. It's quite difficult to admit to ourselves that we enjoy hating. We like being the dark character, and often, when we watch movies, we are drawn to the villains on a very subconscious level. Because when we are good, we are limited in how we can express ourselves. But when a person chooses the role of the villain, they are allowed much more. They don't feel bound by moral principles. And we enjoy hating, letting out this dark side of ourselves and acting with such willfulness, allowing ourselves what is forbidden by moral standards. And right now, the whole world is in turmoil. The whole world is experiencing armed conflicts and a great deal of confrontation. And this black genie, the genie of hatred, has just broken free. To harbor deep hate, to seek a bitter revenge, to prove oneself absolutely right, and to win finally. And sometimes all of this can be on a smaller scale. For example, saying hurtful things to someone or devaluing and destroying with words. When we succumb to the overwhelming feeling of hatred, but firmly believe we have a righteous and morally defensible cause, it allows us to act out, to be deeply enraged, to be intentionally malicious, to be relentlessly vengeful, and yet still continue to see ourselves as fundamentally good and virtuous people. Pure and good. I once had an experience. My friends and I went to a bar. It was a small bar, and there was a girl there, truly beautiful and striking, the most beautiful one in the place. And when I went out to dance, I felt this girl's gaze on me. It was something like, "This is my space, everything here belongs to me." As I was dancing, I saw how she was filled with this energy, the urge to do something to prove that she was better. She hadn't been dancing before, but then she stepped into the center and started drawing attention to herself. In other words, she got involved, and she started living it all out. Maybe she didn't really need it at first, but when she had someone to compete with, it rose in her. That energy awakened the potential within her that had seemed dormant. This is how our inner mechanism, our personalities, work. We might feel a lack of this energy, but when hatred arises towards something or when there is opposition with someone, it's as if we gain an extra resource. What was previously inaccessible is now abundant. And in such moments, a person truly feels alive. He feels alive. His blood is boiling. Every cell in his body, his entire psyche is mobilized. And the actions we take out of hatred linger in our souls for a long time. For example, when you finally speak your mind to someone in a moment of anger, when you decide to say everything you've been holding back. In that moment of speaking out, you feel a surge, as if you have become a fire-breathing dragon. And many people say with a certain pride, Don't awaken my dragons, or I'll show you what I'm capable of. And after this outburst of hatred, this aggression, a person falls into a trap because now they have to live with the consequences of this act of aggression. In other words, they can no longer reconsider whether they were right. They cannot feel guilt because they would immediately realize that they were not a pure, righteous kitten, but rather a furious, dark demon. And they have to keep feeding this conveyor belt, constantly bringing in more and more facts to support it. So the urge toward hatred, the urge toward destruction is something a person is forbidden to recognize in themselves because it is inhuman, it is anti-human. It's like wanting to destroy someone's business, someone's reputation. All these scandals on social media where a space immediately emerges, a breeding ground for hatred, a breeding ground, an opportunity to express dissatisfaction. And most importantly, it all has to be legitimized and presented under a certain pretext, in a certain way. This so-called righteous struggle, and many bloggers, they exploit only topics of hatred towards someone or something. And as a result, this tendency grows among us. This deep-seated urge that we all have to hate, this insatiable thirst to hate. And it's as if we are finally given the green light, a dedicated space where it's allowed. And we, against our own will be drawn there, because in the moment of destruction, a person feels like a dragon spreading its wings. He feels an incredible sense of power. It is a godlike state. It is just like a person who truly hates himself, who eventually comes to the thoughts of suicide and destroys the thing he hates most, the very source of all his problems, himself. And in the same way, there is murder in words, whether written, spoken, or even in thoughts, when we destroy that source. All these phrases like, I wish you were all dead, I curse you, I hate you, all these expressions allow a person to feel righteous when the recipient of these words has been demonized. But in reality, the person has already crossed that line, the line when he becomes a demon, equal to those he has demonized. And you can understand a lot about a person by the way they speak. By the way, there will be a communication workshop in mid-August where we will be decoding words, and people who are not shy about expressing such categorical, destructive statements about others. Through these words, we can understand what kind of relationship a person has within themselves. That is, once this conveyor belt of hatred has been set in motion, once this drug has been tried, it is no longer so easy. It's not so simple to just stop it all. This conveyor belt of hatred will keep searching for new and new enemies because the person does not understand their own tendency to become a beast. And having received a righteous justification, they begin to create enemies. Just like any dictatorship, it eventually begins to consume its own. In the same way, a person, having tasted this hatred, starts looking for someone to hate. So who are we going to hate today? Americans, perhaps, or Poles, maybe Belarusians, or Petya, or Dasha. Maybe it's already time to start hating those closest to us. That is, a person who expresses these hateful comments. One must be very careful with such people, because all of this can turn against you in one moment if you are labeled as dark, or bad, or demonized. And this black and white thinking, which is especially shaken now, it creates this polarity in the personality, when the personality can be almost demonic, but at the same time, it perceives itself as a saint. Dark fuel. Here is this fuel of hatred, already poured into the car's tank. This is when I want to prove something to someone, to take revenge. The car keeps running on it, but it will constantly need this kind of doping. It's like a husband who gets jealous of his wife and makes up stories about how she cheated on him. And in these moments, he simultaneously feels like a cuckold, that is, a victim. But at the same time, what makes him feel alive is the fantasy of how his woman did it. In other words, he experiences this kind of inner split. I am a wholly victim, but I gain the full right to hate. And this constant, relentless search for someone to hate in our world today creates powerful emotional sensations that are incomparable to almost anything else we might experience. For example, when a woman speaks categorically about her ex, that is, in a derogatory way, it indicates that this dichotomy will show through in many areas of her life. In other words, this categorical attitude, this lack of restraint by moral principles, will also extend to you. So if your partner speaks about someone with deep hatred, that hatred will eventually be directed at you as well. And if there is no one else to hate, that hatred will turn on the partner themselves. That is to say, this organ of hatred that is being stirred up is like a Damocles' sword hanging over the person themselves. And the person begins to look for enemies. For example, when someone speaks about another in a demeaning or disparaging way, they do not perceive it as an attack. For example, someone might say, that silly drawing on your t-shirt, or that haircut doesn't suit you. These are small jabs. The conversation partner feels them as stings. This is the very urge toward destruction, the desire to feel complete power over the one being diminished. And we undoubtedly have experienced this ourselves. We quickly sense it when it happens to us, but when we say such things to others, we don't realize it. And in addition, this spreading sense of pleasure doesn't even allow us to recognize that we're doing something wrong. So, when we focus only on our own feelings, when I enjoy hating, when it fills me with energy, makes me feel alive, pulls me out of depression, if we rely only on our emotions, then yes, everything seems to be fine. But after this kind of drug, this desire to hate, and even those close to us become affected, it eventually plunges a person into a state of depression. In the end, a person feels completely alone and in an absolutely hostile environment. So you see, this conveyor belt of hatred, yes. Just like with war, once it is set in motion, the circle of those you consider your own becomes smaller and smaller. The number of people I hate, those I consider to be wrong, while I continue to see myself as right, keeps growing. In other words, this process will not stop on its own. Once it is set in motion, it tends to expand, to absorb more and more enemies, because enveloping them in a demonic shroud creates a greater stimulus for the individual. And it's like with drugs, you constantly need to increase the dose. I certainly don't intend to lecture you or preach about hating someone, about hatred. But a person who hates cannot create and cannot love, because hatred is much more pleasurable for our personality than love. With love, you feel small, insignificant. You have to respect boundaries, care for others, avoid causing harm. But in hatred, we experience complete permissiveness. That is, we can finally let out everything we've had to hold back, even hide from ourselves. And this withering hatred, this thirst, but then it begins to drain its owner completely. In other words, a person starts to think in a petty way, unable to create anything because destruction is always faster, finding faults, criticizing, devaluing, pointing out how things should be done, and so on and so forth. In this way, the personality degenerates. That is, it becomes smaller and descends to animal instincts, closer to the beast, for whom all these human resources become inaccessible. So the choice is yours. Please share your thoughts on this. Perhaps someone would like to tell a story about how hatred filled their sails and what the consequences were after filling the tank, filling your own engine with this dark fuel. And also, please share your opinions about inspiring hatred. Why can't you let go of it? And what would happen if you suddenly denied yourself the opportunity to be inspired by hatred? I'll wrap up here and remind you that the School of Communication will take place in mid-August. We will be exploring narrative, how, through words, you can understand who is in front of you. And on my original channel, you have the opportunity to subscribe for sponsorship. There is a section called Psychoanalysis Online. You can ask questions there. All of this can be found in the recordings section. And as always, please like, comment, and support the channel. See you next time. Bye.